Hello there, all of you absolutely lovely people. Once again, I am Dax, and today I'm going to be talking about why I study Hermetics. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that this is my personal journey. Everybody has their own unique journey, so your experiences will be different from mine. And I also want to point out that one of the main things about my story involves the fact that I had to find out who I wasn't before I started finding out who I am. And I am still learning today. So much of this is going to be me learning who I'm not. Going back to my 20s, I was very fundamentalist in my Christianity. I was what I today would call a Bible thumper. I was all about the law. I was all about condemning people who didn't conform to what I thought a good person was. And that's one thing that you find among fundamentalist Christians. As far as a fundamentalist Christian is concerned, only fundamentalist Christians are good people. Everybody else, they need to be saved, or they are some sort of degenerate for not finding Christianity, not being part of Christianity. When I was in my 20s, this is very much the game that I was playing. But what started happening to me is I slowly became less religious and more spiritual. I would ask questions, I would have experiences, and this started leading me away from organized religion into what I today call spirituality, a true spiritual path. Now let me explain to you what I mean by that when I say I became less religious and more spiritual. There's basically a trinity of terms that are involved with the process of finding God, going on your path to find God, all of this. The three legs of the Trinity are cults, religions, and spirituality. And the difference between them is this. A cult is a group of people who accept the word of a person or an individual as gospel. That is what a cult is. Everything that the leader says is gospel. That's a cult. Now, a religion is just like a cult, except instead of treating the word of an individual as gospel, they treat the written word of a document as gospel. That's what turned Christianity from a cult into a religion, was the Bible was compiled in 320 AD. The third leg of the seeking God, understanding who you truly are Trinity is spirituality. Spirituality does not give a crap about what anyone else says. Spirituality does not care about what a leader tells you to believe, and spirituality does not care about what's in a written document. Spirituality cares about your experiences. What have you done? What have you seen? What have you experienced? That's spirituality. And that's what started leading me away from Christianity, is I started becoming less religious and more spiritual. What have I seen? What have I done? What has my life told me about the subject? And also, one of the biggest problems I found with Christianity is the whole statement that Jesus is the only way to God. In the beginning, before I started thinking about the ramifications of what this meant, it made sense to me. But then it started occurring to me that what about the people who have never heard of Christ? And the answer would always come back, well, that's why we're supposed to go out and minister to everybody. And I was like, well, but still there's going to be people who have never heard of Christ. What about beings on other planets? Assuming that they even acknowledged that life on other planets could exist, their response would be, well, if they've never heard of Christ, they will be judged according to their conscience. And so, well, if you've never heard of Christ, so you're going to be judged according to your conscience, then Christ is not the only way to God. So, for most Christians, the idea that Christ is the only way to God, This is the reason to be Christian. This is what makes Christianity profound and important. To me, it does the opposite. For me, the statement, Christ is the only way to God, discredits the religion. This is my personal story. I'm not asking anyone to agree with it, believe it, whatever. But what I am going to say is, if you start posting comments down below about how I need to find Jesus, I found Jesus a long time ago, and it led me to where I am now. So I will just delete your comment. Also, what happened to me when I was a fundamentalist Christian is one day I was sitting there in church listening to the sermon, and it actually occurred to me that I understood the sermon better than the minister giving the sermon. This minister was giving a sermon about a subject that was about genuine kindness and forgiveness, and he was turning it into a fear-based control mechanism. And this, combined with the other things I was experiencing, really turned me off to the whole thing. Now, I wasn't done with my Christianity yet. I still very much considered myself to be a Christian. I still wanted desperately for Christianity to be right. So instead of just throwing out the baby with the bathwater, I started searching in other churches. I started going around, listening to ministers in other congregations, hearing what they had to say. And I kept finding the same thing over and over again. All of this led me to the realization that Christianity is a political organization. It is not a spiritual one. It led me to the conclusion that Christianity does not give two shits about the condition of your soul. It only cares about using fear to control the masses. And once again, this took me several years to come to this conclusion. I did not give up my Christianity easily or lightly. So anyway, yes, I went through this long, drawn-out process of realizing that my fundamentalist Christianity doesn't work. This led me around to trying to listen to different things on the internet. I would go through and read various books, trying to understand what was really going on, which, where we're at, none of us knows what's going on. And if anybody actually tells you that they know what's going on, you know for a fact they're full of it. None of us actually knows what's going on. We only have our own individual experiences. But while I was searching around, listening to interviews, reading books, I was at the local library, and there was a table full of books that they were selling used, just trying to clear out. And I saw this book that I had actually been told about back in high school, but I was curious about it. It was called Communion by Whitley Strieber. It's labeled as an extraterrestrials book. It's labeled as a UFO book. So I picked this up completely off subject. I started reading it, and I was fascinated by what I saw in it. So this led me to start searching for Whitley Strieber on the internet. I found his personal website, which was called unknowncountry.com. I would listen to the free podcasts. I really enjoyed them. I liked what they had to say. I was fascinated by the subject. So I became a subscriber, and I would start listening to his private stuff, and he had audio files on there on how to meditate, and I started listening to those. And this started giving me more personal experiences. I had actually had a couple of personal experiences as a fundamentalist Christian. But working with Unknown Country and getting into meditation really opened the gateway to personal experiences. It really opened the gateway to being a truly spiritual person, not a religious person. And while listening to one of the shows on unknowncountry.com, Whitley Strieber interviewed a man named James Gilliland, who has the I Study Ranch. And James Gilliland started discussing how this wasn't just a UFO ranch, it was also a spiritual retreat. In fact, he said that his original intention for the ranch was to be a spiritual retreat, and the UFO thing kind of came in on its own. So I became fascinated with going there, and I did eventually go there. I am posting a link at the top of the screen to my I Study Ranch video, which I have already made. But I went out to the ranch. One of the things I do want to point out about the ranch is that there were a lot of people visiting the ranch who they loved the energy so much that they wanted to live there, and they would tell James Gilliland that they wanted to live there. The ranch never affected me in that way. I loved the energy at the ranch. It felt really good to be there. But for me, the I Study Ranch did not feel like home. A lot of people that were latching onto that energy and saying, "This is where I belong." I personally did not feel that way. But while I was at the I Study Ranch, I met a man named Neil Kramer, which it was very interesting because for some reason I didn't make the connection of who Neil Kramer was. I was familiar with his work, but I didn't know it was him who had done it. But it was while I was listening to a Neil Kramer interview that I first heard about Franz Barden and the book Initiation into Hermetics, which I'm posting a link to my video that I've done on that book right now. I first learned about Initiation into Hermetics through a Neil Kramer interview. It was one of these interviews where the interviewer was kind of going off the deep end and Neil Kramer had to keep dragging the interviewer back to reality and go, well, let's stick with things that we can actually talk about here instead of just going off into conjecture. But it was the interviewer who mentioned Initiation into Hermetics. Something in me said, I need to look into this book. Once again, when I met Neil Kramer at the ranch, I didn't know it was him. I already owned my copy of Initiation into Hermetics when I went to the I Study Ranch. I brought the book with me. And so I just find it very interesting that here I met this guy that I was fascinated by his work. I met him in person and I didn't link that they were the same guy until later on. Actually, the way I realized that this was Neil Kramer, after the I Study Ranch, I went onto YouTube and I went to watch one of my favorite older lectures. And when I looked at the name on it, it said an interview of Neil Kramer. And if I can find the interview that I'm talking about right now, I'll post that link right now. You know, I already had Initiation into Hermetics when I went to the I Study Ranch. And I met this guy that actually influenced me to get Initiation into Hermetics. I really consider Initiation into Hermetics to be an important part in my spiritual path. What role it's going to play in the big picture, I have no idea because I'm still living my life. Who knows what's going to come up next? That book is a very important aspect of my spiritual path. And to do a quick recap, I went, fundamentalist Christian to walking away from the church to findingunknowncountry.com, which led me to James Gilliland, which led me to Neil Kramer. The reason I did initially start listening to Neil Kramer was because James Gilliland on his own radio show would interview him. There's that sequence of events that all led me to Initiation into Hermetics. And so now I'm going to spend some time discussing why I am studying Hermetics right now, why I continue to work with Hermetics. For me, when reading the book Initiation into Hermetics, one of the first statements he makes in the book, and I don't remember exactly where in the book this is, but Franz Barden makes the quote, and I'm just going to read the quote directly off the screen here. The quote in the book said, "Be kind and generous to your fellow, but hard and relentless with yourself." Franz Barden. For me, I resonated with this message because that was the direction that my own spiritual path has been going for a very long time. Even as a fundamentalist Christian, I was leaning in that direction. The true solution to our world problems is be lovingly ruthless with yourself while being open and forgiving with everyone else. In other words, mind your own fucking business. So that really had a profound effect on me with the book. The fact that the book said this, and the fact that everything else in the book seems to support this idea, really hit it home for me that this book was an important thing for me to be studying. Once again, in a spiritual manner, not a religious manner. A cult treats everything that an individual says as gospel. A religion treats everything that a written document says as gospel. Spirituality is about personal experience. So even though this was a book, it was really pushing the personal experience, and I admired that about it. But in addition to that, another thing that really struck me about Hermetics, I'm going to go back to a Christian concept here, a concept like Christ taught, and that is the fruit of the tree. If you want to know if something is good, which good and evil are subjective concepts here, but when it comes to good and evil, I'm going to go on ahead and use those terms in this video simply to get the point across. Always remember, good and evil are subjective terms. They are not hard, fast rules that dogmatic people want them to be. But when it comes to recognizing whether someone is good or evil, you can recognize the tree by the fruit that it bears. A healthy tree will produce healthy fruit. A rotten tree will produce rotten fruit. If you want to know if someone is quote-unquote good or evil, you don't look at them. You look at what they've produced. You look at what they've left behind in their wake. It's important to recognize that you are easy to fool. I am easy to fool. We are both easy to fool. We can be tricked into loving and admiring someone who wants to destroy us simply because we like the way they look. We think that we can get what we want from them. That's a big one right there. If the person has something that you want, it is very easy to fool you into thinking that they are good. I know a lot of people who admire money, and if somebody with money comes along, everything they say is gospel to this person because they're hoping they're going to get rich too. So it's important to recognize that someone who's evil can easily fool you into thinking they are good simply because you like them or you want what they have. The flip side of that, someone who is good, someone who is kind and warm and loving, someone who genuinely cares about your well-being, it is very easy for you to believe that they are evil simply because you don't like the way they look, or what they're telling you doesn't jive with what you want reality to be. So it is very easy to fool people. It is easy to fool me. It is easy to fool you. It is easy to fool anyone. So when you want to know if someone is good or evil, you don't look at them. You look at the fruit that they produce. You look at what they leave behind in their wake. This individual, this country, this organization, this religion, this whatever it is, what do they leave behind them? Do they leave behind death and destruction? Do they leave behind broken people? Do they leave things behind in a worse state than they were when they were found? Or does this person, organization, religion, whatever it is, leave behind strong, happy, healthy, loving people? do they leave behind people in a better state than they were when they were found. You look at what fruit the tree produces, and from what I can tell, Hermeticism leaves behind very healthy fruit. Now, I am not speaking on behalf of all of magic and all of magicians. In fact, I have personally seen certain magicians scoff at the idea of being a good person and trying to treat others well and all of this stuff. So there are certain magicians, certain magical groups that very definitely leave behind rotten fruit. But you've got to look at the fruit itself. Don't look at the person. Don't look at the organization. Don't look at the country. Don't look at the religion. You look at what they create. What have they left behind? And you use that to determine whether this is someone you want to be involved with. And once again, for me, Hermeticism seems to leave behind very healthy fruit. The people I've seen that practice Hermetics seem to be very genuine, kind, warm, loving people. Now, once again, I'm only basing this on what I've seen. I do not know the full picture. It's possible I could be wrong in what I've said about Hermetics creating very good people, but from what I've seen, that has been the norm. But so far, I have been very impressed by the behavior, the actions, the apparent motives of Hermetic practitioners. Now, of course, this leads me into discussing where I want my Hermetic practice to go. And one thing I want to keep in mind is that I am leaving myself open towards leaving Hermetics and moving on to something else if my soul guidance leads me in that direction. If my spiritual path seems to take me somewhere other than Hermetics, then fine, I'll go there. But right now, Hermetics are still fulfilling the role that I need it to fulfill. And the direction of my own Hermetic practice is currently in a similar direction to where William Nistoli has taken his practice. I really like the direction and the take that William Nistoli has on Hermetics. Many of his detractors will try to say that William Nistoli is out of balance, and one thing that Hermetic teachings say over and over and over again is balance is key. You've got to be balanced. You don't want to favor one element above the others. And so William Nistoli's critics will say he's out of balance, he spends too much time on water. But one thing that I agree with William Nistoli on is that the human race, the entire human species, is deficit in the water element. And if you take a step aside, away from Hermeticism here, let's talk about the human body and vitamins. If you are healthy in almost every way, but you are severely vitamin D deficient, if you go in and you start consuming vitamin D like crazy in any form you can get it, that is not an out of balanced act. That is an act of bringing yourself into balance because you are bringing in this vitamin D that you are severely deficient in. You are bringing yourself into the proper state of health by doing this. In my opinion, that's what William Nistoli is doing with the water element. The human race is very strong in all the other elements. The human race is very strong in the fire element with its ability to blast through obstacles in order to achieve its goals. It's very powerful with the air element and its ability to think and conjecture and mentally solve problems. The human race is very strong in the earth element with the ability to hunker down and work hard and to build things. But the water element, with its ability to empathize and understand what someone else is experiencing and to act in accordance with what's best for not just you, but for everyone? The human race is running on empty with that one, and it's been doing so for a very long time. What William Mistley has stated he is trying to do is he is trying to bring that balance back into the human species. And that is something that I fully support him on. I agree with him on that completely. We need to work on the water element. We are vitamin D deficient in the water element. We need to get that into our souls so that our personalities will be transformed into a more kind, loving, empathic personality type. And really, when it comes right down to it, the human race as a whole is front and center to my sole purpose. Everything I've seen my life, I might not have recognized it at the time, but that seems to be the direction of my sole purpose, has been the elevation of the human race. The human race deserves better than what it has created for itself. But we're not going to get better until we stop being dicks to each other. So that's why I am still working with Hermetics. And I've been working at Hermetics for about 10 years now. So at the very least, it's had some staying power. But I'm working with Hermetics because I like the fruit that it bears. The fruit that Hermetics bears seems to produce the kind of person that the human race needs, not only if it's going to prosper, but if the human race is even going to survive. And I am hopeful for the survival of the human race. It looks dark, but I think we are heading in the right direction. I'm of the opinion that a lot of the darkness we're seeing today is like the final death throes. Something dark that's trying to continue. But I really think that we're heading in the right direction. And for me and my part, Hermetics are taking me there. Even though Hermeticism is an ancient philosophy, it's done a lot of good in the world. It's done far more good than almost any other organization I've seen. For me, that's why I'm still studying Hermetics after about 10 years. I'm still at it because I like the fruit that it bears. And I really see, especially William Mistley's work with the water element, as being integral towards taking the human race in the direction that it needs to go, not only for its very survival, but for the human race to become a better species, a species where we treat each other well. Anyway, I am Dax. Always remember, you are important, you are loved, your needs are valid, but the same is true of everyone else. Everyone else is also important. Everyone else is also loved, and everybody else's needs are also valid. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Goodbye.